already done the opposite of a number. So, for instance, the opposite of 8 is negative 8. What about the opposite of negative 8?
Negative 8.
So you got to kind of think about it a little bit, don't you? All right, so here's how they kind of model it. We have a number line, and the number line doesn't show where 0 is, so you got to kind of pick that where I think 0 is. And then there should be an equal amount of lines on either. There should be 8 lines on either side. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8. So make your number line and label positive 8 and negative 8 because we're going to need it. Just make sure 0 is exactly in the middle. Count it out. So don't guess. You can guess, but then double check it and make sure you have exactly 8 to the right, exactly to the left. Well, let's do number A. What number is 8 units to the right of 0? Obviously, 8. What's the opposite of 8? You need a line after that question mark too. What's the opposite of 8? Liam? Negative 8. And finally, what's the opposite of negative 8? 8. What you've illustrated by doing this is the opposite of an opposite. Here's how it works. We started out at 8. What's the opposite of 8? Negative 8. What's the opposite of negative 8? So technically what you've done is the opposite of the opposite. You wind up where you start. Okay? So the general gist of it is the opposite of an opposite is always going to be the number you started with, or the original number. Okay? Easy, right? Here's how you have to express it as an equation. This is the part that's kind of new. Suppose I want to do the opposite of negative 4. Here's how you do it. The first thing that you do is you take the integer. In this case, the integer itself is negative 4. And you put it in parentheses. So all that is right now is negative 4 in parentheses. Now let's say I just want to show the opposite of negative 4. I'm going to put a negative symbol outside the parentheses. And the way we now read that is the opposite of negative 4. Which is what, by the way?
4.
What does that equal to? 4. Take it a step further. Now suppose I want to know the opposite of negative 4. You take this entire expression, which is this right here, and you put parentheses around it. And then you add another opposite sign on the outside of that. So you have this. And I'll read it to you and it'll make sense. This is the way you read it. Every time you see a negative symbol, that's the opposite. The opposite of negative 4. And what does that equal?
Negative 4.
You're right back to where you started, whatever that number was in the original parentheses. And that's the way you write it out. So the way you read this again is the opposite of negative 4 equals negative 4. We'll practice it. Antonia.
Isn't it how many opposites there are? If it's like an even amount of opposites, it's the same. And it's
You have just learned all by yourself without me telling you the basics of multiplying integers with negative numbers. He's right. If you have an odd number of minus signs, see it? You have 3 negatives, right? Your answer will always be negative. Okay?
That's cool.
All right. What about if you see an even number of negatives? Your answer will always be, if you can remember that between now and 7th grade, when you do multiplication and division of negative numbers, you'll always be right. We'll revisit it too. All right, but let's practice this.
If the number, so odd number of negatives, it's,
Negative.
4, that counts.
Well, basically, good question. Just count up all your negatives. If you see 3 negatives, no matter where they are in the expression, your answer will always be negative. Okay, let's practice it. Opposite of negative 13. Well, the first thing I do, according to my directions, what's my integer? What's my integer?
Negative 13.
Negative 13 goes in parentheses. Always start with that first. Say to yourself, what's my integer? Now, what do they want to know? Opposite of negative 13. What do I got to do next?
You put a negative sign outside the parentheses.
That's all, because they're not asking opposite of opposite. They're just asking opposite of negative 13. Now, you need your equal sign. What did I tell you? If there's an even number of negative signs, the answer is always, which makes sense. What's the opposite of negative 13? On a number line, think of it. You're over here. On the number line, negative 13. The opposite of negative 13 is positive 13. Okay? Okay, let's do opposite of 4. What's the integer?
Positive.
What's the integer for 2? What's my actual integer?
Negative 4.
No, what is, no, look at it. The integer itself is 4. Put that in parentheses. Now what?
Put a negative, 2 negatives outside the 4.
And right now, that's the opposite of 4. They don't want that. They want the opposite of the opposite, don't they?
Yeah.
What do I got to do now?
Put another.
Equals, and then what's my answer, Andrew?
4.
Correct. Even number of negative symbols, then your answer is always positive. Got it? Okay, so what you guys are going to do for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to have you guys do page 5 and 6. Okay, and you can do that in your groups. If you want to group up, you can. 5 and 6.